Celia, I know and appreciate feminist philosophy, feminist literary criticism, but what I don't understand is feminist theology. How does a feminist view affect what seems to be asexual, which is theology?
Well, you've put your finger on what the feminist theologians object to, and that is it doesn't seem to them to be asexual. It seems to the way we've described God is in male language, in the language of he, and the way some feminists are also exercised by the fact that Christ is a man rather than a woman. So they've ended up with a crucified woman on the cross as a way of emphasizing that. So I think what feminist theologians try and do is reread the tradition through the eyes of a woman, as it were, thinking, well, what has been missed out of the script? Is there other areas we've missed out? Some want to go further and not just revise the script, but actually understand God in a completely new way, either by weaving in concepts of the feminine into God, or by saying that all our understandings of God are far too patriarchal. What we need is a theology, not a theology. And therefore we need to understand God as a goddess, not as God. So those are the sort of different sort of layers in which you can read.
I mean, there's some valid points in that, and certainly interesting. So what are some specifics that if you follow that train of thought, you would have? Or how would our understanding of God change if we walk down that path?
I think our understanding of God would change in that we now take account, if you like, and the other side of human experience. So if we take only one side of human experience, we get models of God, like God as the shepherd or God as the king, those kind of almost monarchical images, which are quite hierarchical. What feminist theologians try and stress is images of God which are more relational, more cooperative. Now, it doesn't mean that men can't think of God like that as well. They can. But what feminist theologians try and do is push us in the direction of thinking more in a relational kind of way. And one way I've done this myself is through the notion of wisdom or Sophia, which is a feminine term. So wisdom, Sophia, if you like, is woven into our understanding of who the Trinity is. I prefer to do it rather like that, rather than create a theology or a goddess theology, because I don't think a goddess theology is convincing as a Christian understanding, unless you're what some feminists are, which is post-Christian, which means they've abandoned the Christian faith completely because they think it is barren in terms of its potential to think theologically from a feminist point of view.
Well, none of the Trinity is female. It certainly, I've never heard that.
No, it's not female, but there's a feminine face of God, if you like. I would say that if we are using human language to understand who God is, and God is beyond gender, as you've so correctly pointed out at the beginning, then we need male and female images to complement one another if we are going to think about God in a holistic kind of way.
And so how does that extend to the whole theological process in Christianity, the salvation process? Is there any deeper feminist understanding? You said a different understanding of the historical person of Jesus.
I think many feminists object to the idea of a crucified God, or as if God is somehow punishing a punishing face of God. I don't think that the crucifixion needs to be understood like that. I think it should be understood more as an abhorrent act, human act, as it were, that's then used by God for God's own purposes. But some feminist theologians prefer not to see the atonement in that kind of way, and so they would reread the atonement. And they also may reread the resurrection more in what I call ecological language. So the resurrection then becomes just a recycling of our bodily elements into other life forms. So they resist perhaps some of the traditional understandings of demythologize them. Yes. Although I'd said there's a huge variety of feminist positions, so it's very hard to generalize what the feminist view is. But almost all feminists, from whatever their perspectives, do try and weave in what I would call a less patriarchal understanding of who God is and how God acts in history.
Yet they all believe in a supernatural God.
I would say that the feminist theologians, if they're called theologians, will believe in some sort of agency of God, yes, whether it's a goddess theology or it's a reworking of the traditional texts.
Now, the ones who believe in the goddesses, are they believing in it truly in their heart of hearts, or are they believing in it to make the point that a patriarchal view of God is inappropriate?
I don't know the answer to that because I haven't interviewed them and asked them their own biography. I mean, it seems from reading it that it's part of their own understanding of who God is, because very often what feminist theologians of that stripe will do is not just talk about a goddess theology, they'll also encourage participation amongst other women who will come together in a kind of circle dance, imitating, as it were, what they see as the goddess.
They don't have potions, do they?
Not quite, but I mean that's why feminist theology can sometimes be marginalized, because they get mocked by people like yourself and others who see this as some sort of weird script. I think that's unfortunate. There are also others who are far more careful about looking at the cultural and social and political implications of feminist thought and using feminist criticism and weaving that in. And I think that's more interesting.
How have you used it in your own theologies?
I've used it simply by drawing on Sophia. Sophia, as I say, is a feminine term, so I try and see God as having a feminine face. So I don't want to margin or put into a separate bracket feminist thought. And I've also criticized some male theologians who've tended to stereotype the male-female relationships in a certain kind of way, and see the male as having the agency, having the rationality, and the female having the relationality and the maternal instincts. I think that is a very stereotypical way of dividing the roles up. So I've used some of the feminist critique in relation to the sources I've used, and I've also tried to weave it in. But at the same time, I want to remain within the tradition rather than outside it.